Hello everybody and welcome to this week's video. Our lesson this week is all about integers and rational numbers, and we're going to talk more about what those terms mean. Your materials that you'll need today, you'll need your welcome packet, something to write with and some paper, and you'll need your calculator as well. The calculator on your phone will work just fine. We've got a warm-up question at the bottom of the screen here. This warm-up question is pulled from a previous homework assignment. So if you've been keeping up with your homework, this question should look familiar. Go ahead, pause the video, take a moment to try and answer this question. See if you can come up with an answer you think is right, and then we're going to move on. All right, our learning goals for this week. By the end of the week, you will be able to identify absolute value of a number as its distance from 0 on the number line. Determine the distance between two numbers on the number line, including using the absolute value of their difference. Add, subtract, multiply, and divide integers and rational numbers. So those are our three main learning goals for this week. This is what you are working towards. All right, and here's a little preview of the types of questions we're going to be working on this week, just to get your mind situated, what you're going to be working on solving. So got three example questions here. First one says, Mara woke up on a cold winter morning and the temperature was -4 degrees Fahrenheit. By the afternoon, the temperature had risen 20 degrees. What was the temperature in the afternoon? Take a minute, see if you can predict that answer. And then when we get to the end of the lesson, see if you can go back and double check your answer, see if it still makes sense to you after you've learned more about this topic. The second example here says each month a business is accumulating $100 of debt. How much debt will the business have after 12 months? And then our last example here, it says what is the absolute value of -4 minus 5? All right, let's get into it. So some important vocabulary we're going to be using and working with today. We're going to be talking a lot about number lines. So number lines are a visual way of representing numbers and the order that they go in. We're going to be working with whole numbers, and we're going to be working with fractions and decimals. So fractions and decimals are numbers that show a part of a whole. We're going to be working with integers. Now, we talked about integers back in Unit 1. Integers are all whole numbers, including negative whole numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those are integers, but also 0, -1, -2, -3, -20, and so on. So all whole numbers, including positives and negatives. We're going to be working with rational numbers. So for now, when you see the term rational number, you can really just think of it as a number. Whenever you're dealing with numbers, most likely you're dealing with rational numbers. A rational number is basically just includes whole numbers and fractions. So all of that stuff in one big group. And then finally, we're going to be revisiting the idea of absolute value. So absolute value is the distance between a number and 0. Hopefully you remember that from Unit 1. So let's review absolute value, starting off with this first question here. What is the absolute value of -10? So if we remember that absolute value means the distance between a number and 0, right? So it means distance. We don't care about direction. We don't care if it's positive or negative. We're just talking distance here. Then the distance between -10 and 0 is 10. Just regular old positive 10. So basically, absolute value takes any number and makes it positive. The second question here says, what is the absolute value of 4? Right, these little bar symbols, they mean absolute value. So what is the absolute value of 4? Well, what's the distance between 4 and 0? It's 4. Right, so absolute value just takes any number, kind of ignores the sign, and we just say it's positive. What is the distance between -6 and 0? 6. It's 6 spaces away. And what's the distance between 6 and 0? Also 6. All right, so now we're going to get into the real good stuff here. We're going to talk about adding and subtracting with integers. So adding and subtracting with positive numbers and negative numbers. We're going to be building on what you already know about working with positive numbers, which you've been doing since you were a tiny little kid. So you're already halfway there. So first thing to keep in mind when we talk about adding and subtracting here is that adding and subtracting is just another way of saying increasing and decreasing. So when we add or subtract, we increase or decrease. We get bigger or we get smaller. And we're going to start by talking about what we already know, what we are already comfortable with, and that's positive numbers. We're going to take that as our starting point and then build from there. The key thing to remember with signed numbers, so numbers with a positive sign or a negative sign, is that when you switch the sign, you switch the results or you switch the action that you take. So positives and negatives are opposites. So when you switch from positive to negative or negative to positive, kind of like a light switch, it just switches the result that happens. You'd switch from positive to negative or negative to positive. So that's the real key thing to keep in mind. That's the key principle that where everything we talk about today builds on. So keeping in mind that positives and negatives are opposites, and so switching between them is going to switch your results, is going to switch what happens. Okay, so add and subtract means increase and decrease. Let's start again with what we already know about our positive numbers. Let's start with adding positive numbers. So I'm going to pick a number to start with. Let's say 4. So 4. And now I'm going to do what I already know how to do. I'm going to add a positive number. So I'm going to add, let's say I add 2. So here I am adding a positive number to my starting point. So 4 is where I'm starting, and I'm going to add a positive number to that. That's what I already have done 1,000 million times in my life. So 4 plus 2, what does that equal to? It is equal to 6, right? 4 plus 2 is 6. Now, if we think about what that looks like on our number line, actually, I'm going to go in here and choose different numbers that fit on my number line. I didn't even consider that when I was making up these numbers. So let's do 3 plus 2 instead. 3 plus 2, just so it'll fit on our number line. 3, and then I'm going to add a positive number, 3 plus 2, that equals 5. So what does 3 plus 2 look like on the number line? It means let's start at 3. So 3 is what we've already got. And then we are going to add 2. We're going to go up. We're going to increase by 2. So 1, 2, and we land on 5. 5 is the result. So when we add a positive number, it tells us, adding a positive number tells us that we should increase that many spaces. We should go up. We should travel to the right on our number line by that many spaces. Adding a positive number means increase, means travel to the right. Okay, so now let's try subtracting a positive number. Subtract a positive number. Okay, so I'll just keep the same numbers here. 3 is my starting point, and I'm going to subtract 2. And what's the answer there? The answer is 1. And what does that look like on the number line? Well, that means our starting point is 3. And then instead of adding 2, I am subtracting 2. So I'm going down 1, 2. I am decreasing by 2. So subtracting this positive 2 tells me, so subtracting a positive number tells me to decrease. Okay, so that is what we already know. We know that adding a positive number makes you get bigger, and subtracting a positive number makes you get smaller. Now, keeping this in mind, and also keeping in mind that key thing we just talked about. So the key thing that anytime you switch between positive and negative, it causes the opposite thing to happen because positives and negatives are opposites. So keeping in mind that adding makes you get bigger and subtracting makes you get smaller, we're going to see what happens when we now add or subtract with negative numbers. So what happens when instead of adding a positive number, let's say now I'm going to add a negative number. So I'm switching the sign, switching the action that I'm going to take. So before I did 3 plus 2, now I'm going to do 3 plus negative 2. So my starting point is positive 3, right? When you don't see a sign in front of a number, we assume that it's positive. So my starting point is positive 3. And now instead of adding positive 2, I'm adding negative 2. So what do you think is going to happen now that I've switched from positive 2 to negative 2? Well, the opposite thing is going to happen. Instead of increasing, I am going to decrease. So instead of increasing 2 spaces, I'm going to decrease 2 spaces. I will get an answer of 1. So adding a negative number causes you to decrease. It causes the opposite action to happen. So notice that adding this negative 2, it gave us the same result as subtracting positive 2. Both of those things cause you to decrease. Okay, so now we're going to fill in the last possibility here. So we talked about subtracting a positive number. Now let's think about what's going to happen if we do the opposite, if we subtract a negative number. Well, when I switch from positive to negative, the opposite thing must happen. So instead of causing me to decrease, the opposite thing will happen. I will increase instead. So you already know that subtracting a positive number causes you to decrease. When you do the opposite, when you subtract a negative number, you do the opposite thing. You increase. So instead of 3 minus 2, now I'm going to do 3 minus negative 2. So instead of decreasing, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to increase by 2 spaces. So 3 increased by 2 spaces will give me an answer of 5. So now notice that adding a positive number and subtracting a negative number, they both do the same thing. They both increase. Whereas subtracting a positive and adding a negative both cause you to decrease. Okay, let's try that with a few more examples. So I'm going to start with the same idea. I'm going to start by talking about adding a positive number. I'm I'm going to choose a different starting point this time. I'm going to abbreviate that. So add a positive number. Let's say we start with, -3 this time. So I'm going to start with -3. And I'm still going to add a positive number. I'm going to add 2. 3 plus -3 plus 2. Well, we know that adding positive numbers makes you increase. Okay, adding a positive makes you go up, makes you travel to the right on your number line. So if I start at -3, that's my starting point, and I increase by 2, 1, 2, right? I want to get bigger, I want to travel to the right. My answer is going to be -1. Right, I've gotten less negative, which means I've increased. Okay, so now let's let's subtract a positive number. So continuing with that action we're a little more comfortable with, subtracting a positive number. And again, I'm going to abbreviate that word. So subtracting a positive number. I'm going to take the same starting point, -3. And I'm going to subtract a positive number, so I'm going to do -2. So we know that subtracting positive numbers makes us decrease. So instead of going up 2 spaces, instead of increasing 2 spaces, I'm going to decrease 1, 2 spaces. I'm going to decrease 2 spaces to land at -5. Okay, so even though we had a negative starting point this time instead of a positive starting point, the actions that we took were the same. When we added a positive number, we increased, and when we subtracted a positive number, we decreased. Okay, let's continue with all the possibilities here. So now I am going to add a negative number. Same starting point, -3. Now I'm going to add -2. So before, right, when you add a positive, it makes you increase. When you do the opposite, when you add a negative, it makes you decrease. So starting at -3 and decreasing 2 spaces will make us land at -5. And now finally, when we subtract a negative number, I'm going to take the same starting point, and instead of subtracting 2, I'm going to subtract -2. Well, when we subtract positive numbers, we know we decrease, right? That's kind of like the normal thing. That's what we're used to. But now when we throw a negative into the mix here, when we do the opposite, right, subtracting a negative makes us increase instead of decreasing. Positives and negatives are opposites. So -3 minus -2, we're going to increase 2 spaces to land at -1. So again, we see that adding a positive number and subtracting negative numbers, they end up meaning the same thing. They're both about increasing. And then subtracting positive numbers and adding negative numbers are both about decreasing. So let's get some practice here. Take a moment. I would highly recommend, if you didn't already, I would highly recommend that you copy down what we did on these 2 slides together. Copy all that information down as best you can, and then give these practice problems a try. After you try them, I would recommend double checking your answer on the calculator. So if you're using your phone calculator, you want to find the negative button wherever it is. And if you do have questions about using your calculator, let me know or bring it in with you to class, and we can figure out where the negative sign is, how to put negatives into your calculator. Okay, so pause the video, give these a try, and when you think you've got them all, come back to it and we'll go through them together. Okay, so number 1, 5 plus 2. That should be easy for us. 5 plus 2, we're starting at 5 and we're increasing by 2. That's going to equal 7. 5 minus 2, we're starting at 5 and we are decreasing by 2. So that'll equal 3. Now 5 plus negative 2. So here we added positive 2 and we increased. Here we're adding negative 2. We're going to decrease. So that will be 3. Notice I put parentheses around my negative number here. You'll see that sometimes, like in worksheets and test questions, the parentheses are just there to make it clear that the negative sign is stuck to that number. It's not supposed to be a subtraction sign. So you'll see the parentheses used sometimes. It means the same thing whether the parentheses are there or not. So if I had that same thing written for number 3, but without parentheses, you get exactly the same result. It has exactly the same meaning. The parentheses are just there for clarity. Okay, and then number 4, 5 minus negative 2. Well, up here we subtracted 2, and we decreased. So now we're subtracting negative 2. We should increase. Okay, let's continue. Again, pause the video, try these yourselves, check your answer with the calculator, and then come back to it when you think you've got it. Negative 5 plus 2. Well, we're adding a positive, so we should increase. If our starting point is negative 5, our starting point is negative 5, and we increase 2 spaces, if we travel to the right 2 spaces, we are going to end up at negative 3. We just increased. We got closer to being positive. All right, negative 5 minus 2. Well, same starting point. Negative 5, if you decrease, if you travel to the left 2 spaces, you would go off of this number line here, but just imagine it continues. You would end up at negative 7. All right, and now we are, instead of adding positive 2, now we're adding negative 2, so we should decrease. We will land at negative 7. And finally, in number 8, we're subtracting negative 2 instead of subtracting 2. So we will increase. We'll have an answer of negative 3. So getting comfortable with your negative numbers, it takes a little practice because you've mainly been working with positive numbers your whole life. And so now you're throwing negative numbers into the mix. It is more possibilities for your brain to keep track of. And so you are training your brain to work with these new numbers, these new possibilities. It'll take some time. You'll need some practice. I would recommend going over problems like this. You can even write your own problems. So you can just pick your own numbers and practice adding and subtracting with them, and then check your answer on a calculator. You'll also be getting practice in your homework, of course. Okay, so a lot of times when you are learning about adding and subtracting with integers or adding and subtracting with just rational numbers in general, you are taught some rules. Now, you can just memorize these rules and they will guide you to getting the correct answer. However, I find that a lot of the time people forget the rules or they get mixed up about the rules because they don't really understand the reasoning behind the rules. They don't really understand this key principle that addition and subtraction are about increasing and decreasing, and that when you switch between positive and negative, it causes the opposite result, the opposite action to happen. So if you don't understand those concepts, then memorizing these rules and using these rules is going to be difficult, and you're probably going to get them mixed up. So I would really focus on the last bunch of slides first, and then once you start feeling comfortable with that, then you can focus on these rules and how they relate to what you already know. So the patterns that we just saw, where adding a positive makes you increase, subtracting a positive makes you decrease, adding a negative makes you decrease, subtracting a negative makes you increase, those patterns that we just saw, they can be summarized by these rules here. So we have two addition rules. The addition rules are that when you add the same signs, you add those numbers and your result will keep the same sign. So for example, positive 4 plus positive 2 gives you positive 6, right? You keep the same sign. Negative 4 plus negative 2 gives you negative 6. And you add two negative numbers, you add the numbers and you keep the same negative sign. Okay, and then the second rule is if you're adding different signs. So you would subtract the numbers and then take the sign of the larger value for your result. So let's say we are adding a negative 4 and a positive 2. Well, we have a negative and a positive, so we would subtract them. We'd do 4 minus 2, and then we would keep the sign of the larger value. So 4 is larger than 2. Our answer, that means our answer is going to be negative because 4 is negative here. So our answer would be negative 2. And let's say we did the opposite. Let's say we did 4 plus negative 2. We would subtract 4 minus 2, and we keep the sign of the larger number. The 4 is positive, so our answer will be positive 2. All right, so those are our rules, our guidelines for addition. Now subtraction. Subtraction just has one rule, and it's basically a rule that helps you turn the problem into an addition problem so that you can apply your addition rules. And it is subtraction means adding the opposite. Some people have learned this rule before as keep, change, change. If that's what you know, you can continue to think about it that way. So let's think about this here. Let's say we have 4 minus negative 2. So we have this rule that subtraction means adding the opposite. So that means you keep your first number the same, you change subtraction to addition, and you change the second number to its opposite. So negative 2 will become positive 2. And then you can apply your addition rules, right? You know how to do 4 plus 2. And that will be 6, not 2. All right, and then let's say we're doing 4 plus negative 2. Nope, not 4 plus negative 2. Let's say we're doing 4 minus 2. Now you already know how to do 4 minus 2, so you just go ahead and you do 4 minus 2. But if we're thinking about what this rule means for subtraction, subtraction means adding the opposite. So first number, we keep the first number, we change the subtraction to addition, and we change the second number to its opposite, so negative 2. So these two expressions are equal to each other. They both mean the same thing. They will both give us a result of 2. Most of the time, you are probably going to be using this rule to help you think through problems where you are subtracting with negative numbers, because oftentimes that's like the trickiest situation to deal with mentally. So you can remember that subtracting a negative is the same thing as adding a positive. Another way I like to think of it as the minus sign and the negative sign, they're right next to each other. You can just pull them together into a plus sign. Okay, so that's addition and subtraction. That's all there is to it. Now we're gonna move on to multiplying and dividing. We're gonna basically jump straight into the rules because multiplying and dividing are a lot simpler, which is nice. But again, this builds right on top of our key principle, which is that with signed numbers, when you switch the sign, you switch the result or the action that you take, because positives and negatives are opposites. So let's think about this principle for a moment, just so that we can see where these two rules come from. Let's say we start with our basic situation, just multiplying with two positive numbers. So I'm going to do 4 times 2. I'm writing out multiplication this way. This is just one way to show multiplication. When you have a number right next to parentheses with nothing in between, that means multiply. So this says 4 times 2. That gives you a regular old positive result, gives you 8. Now, if I change one of these numbers, if I switch the sign, that means I should switch my result. So if I instead do 4 times negative 2, I'm going to have to change something about my results. My result is going to become negative. Now, if I make another change, if I make my 4 negative, so I've changed the setup again, I've made one more change, that means my result has to change. It can't stay the same from what it was in my last one. So I'm going to have to go from -8 to +8. So that's kind of where these two rules come from for multiplication and division. Multiplication and division, again, they work the same way. So with multiplication and division, if you have two numbers that are the same sign, it gives you a positive result. Different signs will give you a negative result. So let's say we have 25 divided by 5, two positives. We get a positive result. Let's say we have two negatives, so -25 divided by -5 is going to be +5. Right, that's rule number 1. Same signs gives you a positive result. Second rule, if you have different signs, you get the opposite. You get a negative result. So if we have -25 divided by +5, right, different signs, we're going to get a negative result. Again, this also applies for multiplication, same thing. If we do 25 divided by -5, we get a negative result. So different signs, we get a negative result. Okay, so let's get a little practice here. Again, try these yourself, see what you come up with, and then you can check your answers. Remember that putting a number right next to parentheses just means multiplication. And then in number 4 here, I'm using the little slash mark for division just because that was the quickest way to type up division when I was making this presentation. So pause the video, give these a try. When you're ready, come back to us. So number 1, -2 times 4. We've got different signs, so we're going to get a negative result. Number 2. +2 times +4, same signs, we're going to get a positive result. Number 3, -2 times -4, same signs, so we're going to get a positive result. And then number 4, we've got 8 divided by -2, right? You could also think of this as 8 divided by -2, means the same thing. We've got different signs, positive and a negative, so we're going to get a negative result. All right. Now, let's return to this idea of absolute value. We said that absolute value was the distance between a number and 0. And so you might see absolute value pop up in some slightly more complicated calculations. Never fear, it still means the same thing. So for example, this says absolute value of -4 minus 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to calculate -4 minus 3 and then take the absolute value of that. So what is -4 minus 3? I'm starting at -4 and I'm subtracting a positive, so I want to decrease. So I want to travel to the left on my number line. So I would get -7. The absolute value of -7 is 7. All right, so pause the video, try these 3 practice problems here, and then come back when you're ready to go over them. All right, number 1, it says the absolute value of -4 minus 3. So I'm going to figure out what is the absolute value of -4, and then I'm going to subtract 3. So the absolute value of -4 is 4 minus 3 is 1. All right, number 2 here, it says the absolute value of -3 times -5. So I'm going to figure out what is the absolute value of that thing. Well, -3 times -5 will give me +15. So I want to know the absolute value of +15. And it's just +15, right? The answer is 15. All right, and then finally number 3 here says the absolute value of 4 minus 10. So I need to figure out what is 4 minus 10. We're starting at 4, and then we're subtracting 10, so we're decreasing by 10. So we would end up at -6. What's the absolute value of -6? Just 6. All right. So we're going to wrap up our lesson today by doing some practice word problems. So this is where we're seeing positive and negative numbers at work in some more everyday situations. If your everyday situations include scuba diving, maybe they do. I personally have never been scuba diving, but I hear it's pretty cool. So maybe one day. All right, number 1, Terrell lives 20 feet above sea level. Today, he participated in a scuba dive where he descended 30 feet below sea level. Which integer describes Terrell's change in position from his home to the lowest point of his dive? Okay, well, everything in this problem is kind of referencing sea level. What is the elevation of sea level? Well, sea level is an elevation of 0. It's kind of the baseline for how high you are, right? If you're like on the beach, you are almost at an elevation of 0, you're at sea level. But if you go up a mountain, right, your elevation gets bigger, you are far above that starting point of sea level. But we can also go below sea level, right? You could go under the water, and that's where we get into negative elevation. So we're still talking about a number line, whereas sea level is 0, going up is positive elevation, going below sea level is negative elevation. So sea level here would be 0 feet of elevation. Now we're told that Terrell lives 20 feet above sea level. So Terrell is up here. He's 20 feet above sea level. And so let's say, right, he goes down to the beach, he's at the water, he goes out on a boat on the water, and then he goes scuba diving. So he's going below the water. He is going 30 feet below sea level. So he is now at an elevation of -30. He's 30 feet below. So we want to know Terrell's change in position from his home where he lives to the lowest point of his dive. So the change in position, if he started here at home to the lowest point of his dive, what was that change overall? How much did he go up or down overall? Well, he went down overall, right? Going from his home down to the lowest point of his dive, that was going down. So we want to be thinking about a negative number here to show that we are going down, we are decreasing. It's a negative change. And how much did he go down? Well, going from 20 to 0 is a change of 20. And then we're going down another 30 overall in total. That is a change of 50, a change of negative 50 because we're traveling down. So the correct answer choice here would be negative 50. If you are thinking of this in terms of your number line or in terms of a calculation, what's happening is you are starting at, well, there's a couple different ways you could do your calculation actually, but you could think of it as I'm decreasing by 20, and then I'm decreasing by another 30 feet, so another 30-foot decrease. So overall, I've decreased by 50 feet. All right, let's try number 2. What is the absolute value of the difference between points A and B? Okay, so absolute value of the difference between points A and B. What does difference mean? It means subtract. So we want to subtract, we want to find the difference between A and B. That means A minus B. But actually we want to take the absolute value of that. So let's figure out what A and B are first. Point A is at, well, we're counting down here by 3s, it looks like. So -3, -6, -9. A is at -12. And we want to subtract, right? We're subtracting A and B. B is at +6, right? 0, 3, 6 is where B would be, so 6. And what is the result of that subtraction there? So -12 minus 6, we're subtracting 6, we're decreasing by 6. We want to go to the left, we want to get more negative. So we're going to end up at -18. And then we want the absolute value of that, which is 18. Whenever you're talking about the absolute value of the difference between two things, what you're really saying is the distance. Because difference, right, subtraction will give you like either a positive or a negative result. But then when you take the absolute value of that, you're saying, I don't care if it's positive or negative, I just want to know that total distance. And we actually did this problem in a previous homework where I asked you what's the distance between A and B. So the distance is 18. If you start at A and you walk up to B, you're going to have to cover 18 steps. Here, we rephrased the question a little bit. We said the absolute value of the difference, but we end up at the same result because it means the same thing. All right, and then number 3, practice problems. Dora is playing the board game Chutes and Ladders. Has anyone played Chutes and Ladders before? I used to be obsessed with that game when I was little. So it's all about, right, moving forward and moving backwards along the board. So she moves forward 2 spaces, back 5 spaces, and then forward 4 spaces. So we could think of forward as being +2, right? So she goes forward 2, and then she goes back 5. We're taking away 5 spaces, and then she goes forward 4. So if we go forward 2 and then back 5, that is a change overall of -3. If she goes forward 2, right, 2 steps forward, 5 steps back, Overall, she's gone back 3 steps. So that's a change of -3. So then -3 plus 4, 4 positive 4 spaces, that's going to be a change, right? If you've gone back 3 spaces, but then you go forward 4 spaces, overall, you will have gone forward 1 space. So the answer, -3 plus 4, gives us an answer of +1 or +1. So her net change would be +1 or +1. Okay. So those are all the practice problems I have for you today. All of the practice we did today is going to be really similar to what you see in the homework. So I hope you're ready and excited to give those homework questions a try. Again, I know that working with positives and negative numbers, it can be a lot to keep track of, but it really just takes practice. You're trying to get used to this new thing. You're trying to get used to these new patterns and these new rules, but I know you can do it. If you put the time in and you practice, you'll get there. And if you ever need more practice, just please let me know. I have plenty of practice, no matter how much practice you need. All right, so what is on our to-do list for this week? You have these Google Classroom posts to look at, so your introduction for the week, your vocabulary and online learning links post. I would highly, 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 highly recommend reading that vocabulary and online learning links post. I'm going to be including videos, links to videos in the online learning links, where to other people's videos where they go into more explanation and more examples about working with positive and negative numbers, and they're really good videos. So if you're feeling at all shaky with your negative numbers, make sure you go in and watch these extra videos because I think they are super helpful. You'll have your vocab quiz going up on Tuesday. You can give that a try if you'd like. And your study skills for this week. This week, the study skills video is all about math anxiety and test anxiety. So talking about what that is, talking about like why people or why many people feel that math anxiety and test anxiety, and just some things that you can do to work with that anxiety and cope with it and overcome it. And then your Google Classroom assignments, we're going to be following our normal schedule here. So Monday, you'll have your problem of the day. Wednesday will be Worksheet Wednesday, and Friday is your second problem of the day. And make sure you sign up for in-person labs if you would like to come in and see me in person. Thank you all very much for joining me in this video, and I will talk to you all very soon.